r/NoSleep, posted by Reddit user Spite Goddess. I run a museum of cursed objects. We were robbed today. You who were wondering how the Crow would do with our brand new employee Courtney, the answer is, I still don't really know. Honestly, he's being quite shifty right now. The first time he saw Courtney, he was pretty standard. He did his whole judging deal, with Courtney frozen in place with her eyes locked on his. When their eye contact broke, the Crow simply cocked his head and went about his business. He's been keeping a close eye on her, but he's declined to interact with her, either positively or negatively. Of course, she hasn't started officially working yet, but she did drop by both yesterday and today to take a look around and familiarize herself with everything. It's been a really hard day, and although I started out posting here as a way to promote the museum, I've started to really like telling you all about my experiences, especially since you've been so interested and supportive. Also, I know quite a few of you have asked about Jan and Herman. As it happens, they were both involved in today's events, which will give me an opportunity to tell you a little bit about them. This morning started out pretty standard. I kissed them goodnight as she headed to the back, finally done with her long night shift. I was incredibly glad that we'd be getting more help soon. Of course, no one really gets up at 6 in the morning to attend a cursed museum, so it was just me, the Crow, and Jan. I was admittedly pretty crabby, due to the throbbing of my recently injured arm, but it was pretty low-key regardless. Let me be very clear, although Jan looks like a human, he definitely isn't. He's got the bone structure down, as well as genuine fibrous muscles. He's even got legitimate flesh. Passing guests often mistake him for just another museum employee, probably guided into doing so by his unremarkable janitor's uniform. But anyone who takes the time to really take a good, hard look at Jan becomes very unsettled and aware that something is not right. It's that animal instinct that, for all our years of evolution, all our centuries of erasing base instincts from ourselves until we as a species only vaguely resemble more astute animals, we still retain to this day. It's the instinct that, when you look into Jan's eyes and you see nothing beyond them, just a blank emptiness, screams at you that you're facing a predator. It's the instinct that says, run. This doesn't bother me, of course, so I had mostly a boring morning with Jan, who inefficiently poked at dusty corners with his broom, while the Crow squawked disapprovingly at his technique. The Crow seemed to absolutely love poking fun at Jan, who seems not to notice him at all. Jan's been in the family for generations. I have no idea how old he is, only that even my mothers don't know how long he's been around, or quite what he is. He's not exactly sentient in the same way that humans are, or even cats or dogs. He's more like a husk, like a human suit that some airheaded angel forgot to stick a soul in before sending it down to earth. He doesn't eat, sleep, or breathe, but I've seen him wield a mop with startling inaccuracy on multiple occasions. When I was a little girl, I knew him only as the butler, and he wore a three-piece suit at all times. My mothers used to tell me he was the protective of our family, a guardian nearly as old as the family itself. So long as we kept our last name, Bleakley, and so long as Jan knew us as family, he would never harm us. And while it would be foolish to rely on him in a pinch, he had a way of coming through when he was most needed. I never experienced such a thing, of course. On several occasions, I was bullied ferociously, and although these experiences usually ended with the bullies being the ones that cried, they were still psychologically damaging. I mean, bullying always is. Anyways, I always had this sort of thought in my mind that Jan would someday swoop in and save me. Even when he didn't, I always trusted him. Until my mother's died and Jan was there, and Jan did nothing. The reason it's important that you know this backstory is that I think I've misunderstood Jan, and today sort of showed me how. I've hated him in a way for a lot of years, and although I would never harm him or behave unprofessionally around him, there's something about looking into the dead eyes of the protector that let your parents die that creates a little bit of tension. Anyway, back to the actual point. It was a quiet morning, but we got a sudden rush in the afternoon. I had to wake up Em to make sure that her hourglass got flipped over every hour, unwilling to risk missing if a customer happened to be extra annoying for a little too long. She was sleepy, but as always, she did her job without a complaint. Courtney was visiting, politely saying hello to Herman, the somewhat insect-like being, as she passed. There was a family with a man, a woman, and 2 kids, all wearing horrendous matching Hawaiian t-shirts that spent an unnaturally long time at the bonnet. I had to tell the man 2 separate times to stop leaning over the barrier to look at it. Idiot. A lanky brunette woman was visiting the Nokia room while her companion, a shorter blonde, cowered nervously at the entrance. A group of clearly hipster college students were starting to turn purple as they inspected the cursed road sign while holding their breath. There was one more visitor. I remembered her face more clearly than any of the others. She was a middle-aged woman, unremarkable at first glance. She had a messy ponytail that said I barely slept last night, and eyes that said I'd like to speak with your manager at once, and a mouth that said out loud, "Where's your restroom?" to me immediately upon entering the museum. I had her sign the contract, pay the entry fee, and kiss the dog, and then pointed her in its direction, sincerely hoping that I wasn't about to have a huge mess to clean up, since she also had a complexion that said, "I'm mildly queasy." I noticed as she hurried off towards the restroom that although her jacket was high quality and clearly well maintained, the clothes underneath looked thin and cheap and scratchy. I didn't think much of her, only glancing her way occasionally as she nervously made her way from exhibit to exhibit. That is, until a gunshot rang out. "Put your hands on your head!" screamed the woman, eyes flashing dangerously. "Down on the ground, now!" Honestly, I have 0 security alarms installed, at all. I guess it had never occurred to me that some idiot might actually be moronic enough to try and rob a facility full of deadly cursed objects. I was reduced to doing what she said, relief coursing through me when I saw Em and Courtney obediently doing the same. I glanced up carefully as the woman began to grab the smallest exhibits, stuffing them into her handbag and jacket with one hand while the other kept the gun trained on the family of 4. I meaningfully shrugged my shoulder at the crow, who was perched on it, but he ignored me. I reminded myself to call him a lazy traitor later, but then, he's quite a capricious little fellow, and only intervenes when he's in the mood, and he feels he truly needs to. Carefully, so as not to spook her into shooting the family, I said, "Ma'am, please be careful. These exhibits are extremely dangerous." "So you say," she sneered the woman, waving the gun in my direction instead, which made my already quick heart rate spike drastically. I swallowed as silently as possible. "All I know, it takes about 3 minutes on the internet to figure out that some of these go for a lot of money. Since you're already scamming people with this shit, I think we can call ourselves even." There was a loud noise from the woman's right, and she spun sharply to find Jan, still sweeping mindlessly. "Stop it!" she screamed. "Stop it, you piece of shit! I'll shoot you!" "Ma'am, please," I said, as she swung the gun to point it at Jan. "He's no threat, I promise you. He's not able to listen to your command. He won't do anything." She seemed about to snap something back at me, but just then, one of the children began to wail, overtaken by fear, I suppose. She swung her gun back towards the family, screeching at them to shut up, just when I thought she was surely going to shoot simply to shut the child up, despite her parents desperately shushing her. Jan seemingly accidentally stumbled into her, still wielding the broom, absent-mindedly. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, ringing around the cavernous museum like an explosion. People were screaming, lots of them now, not just the children. Jan, who clearly had an entry and an exit wound through his chest, continued sweeping, just as poorly as before. The woman was bordering on hysterical now. As I watched, the hourglass with sapphire blue sand dropped from her pocket and ricocheted off to the ground, unharmed. She shot Jan again, then again. Clearly, she couldn't understand the lack of blood, the lack of pain. She went to point the gun at me again, screaming for an answer, and Jan mindlessly meandered in between us. "I'm going," the woman seethed. There was something truly unsettled in her eyes, something not at all right. I wondered briefly, what things tormented her? I wondered what drove her to this. In that moment, though, it didn't matter. She grabbed the little glass tank that contained Herman, the kinda sorta bug thing, and shoved it under her arm, still pointing the gun at Jan, with a shaking hand. "I'm going, and you're gonna let me, understand?" "Yes, ma'am," I said in my best customer service voice automatically, then nearly died of a volatile mixture of anger and embarrassment. "Good," said the woman. She was still clutching Herman's tank firmly. When pausing at the door, she sneered, "Goodbye." So, here's what you need to know about Herman. Herman is kind of a curious little creature. I found him under some unfortunate circumstances involving an untimely demise of a zookeeper. And all Em will tell me about him is that he definitely isn't a bug. Isn't an animal at all, in fact. And that saying goodbye is not a good idea, under any circumstances. He's been in the tank I got him in this whole time, and has never seemed dissatisfied with his experience. He looks quite odd. He's kinda like a trilobite, with one singular eye and a great uncountable multitude of legs that branch out from his body, like axons from a neuronal system. The number of legs has been reported by various visitors to change from day to day, numbering anywhere from 5 to several hundred. Of course, people exaggerate, but I wouldn't doubt it. I'd never personally seen the results of breaking Herman's one simple rule. I only heard about it, and that is until today. It was over in a matter of seconds. "Goodbye," said the woman. Vaguely, I noticed Em squeezing her eyes shut. In my panic, I didn't think to do the same, so I witnessed every gritty detail. In his tank, Herman's leg writhed, pulsing with light as though sending an electrical impulse. He emitted a high-pitched shriek, so loud that several people cried out and covered their ears with their hands, while tears sprung from the eyes of others. The woman stiffened and seized up, her hair standing on end, and her face frozen in a horrified grimace, her eyes staring at nothing. The shriek became louder, the flashing lights more intense, and I was finally forced to shut my eyes against the pain. The sound stopped, and when I opened my eyes, the woman was a charred brown puddle on the floor, surrounded by the items she'd stolen. The smell of iron and burnt flesh hung heavy in the air, stinging at my nostrils and making my eyes water. Herman, in his woman puddle-covered tank, looked extremely pleased with himself, as much as an expressionless buggish creature can. So yeah, don't say goodbye to Herman. In fact, don't say goodbye in the vicinity of Herman, or you might, melt. Obviously, I'm insanely busy cleaning right now. Luckily, the police came and went quickly, as they usually do. But I've still got a puddle of judgmental thief on my floor, and several containers holding exhibits were cracked. Those have got to be repaired for reasons that should seem obvious. What Herman did was horrid, of course, but he did save us. Plus, just like everything else in the museum, he is simply the product of a curse. Nothing more, nothing less. His intent is not evil. He simply lives by the rules he was created to live by. I'm not sure why those bizarre rules are his, but they are. Jan too. I've been thinking it over today, and I'm realizing how big a help Jan actually was. He never turned into a superhero, never attacked, but he was conveniently in the woman's way every time it looked like she might harm someone, even at the expense of himself. Not that the bullets have hurt him any. I just owe him a new outfit. I remember though when I was being bullied, how Jan would stumble stupidly into the room and interrupt a particularly nasty sentence. How once he spilled apple juice on a kid that was calling me names. I don't quite feel so bitter towards Jan anymore. Anyway, I'm sorry this update was sort of all over the place, and I hope it somewhat answered your questions about Jan and Herman. I've got to go clean the horrific mess and scold the crow for being so selectively helpful. Although, I'm quite sure I'll have no effect except for possibly giving him a good laugh at my expense. Until next time, remember, never say goodbye to Herman the Bug. And please, never be stupid enough to try to rob a museum full of cursed objects.